This video is talking about the two major wars Aegon fought during his time as king that aren't considered part of his actual conquest. Next week is about Aegon's rule as king of Westeros, minus these two wars. Aegon the Conqueror had united the Seven Kingdoms by the age of 27, and now faced the challenges of uniting the realms, who had long, bloody histories of conflicts with each other. Aegon I waged war on two separate regions during his rule, the Iron Islands and Dorne. First, we'll talk about the Iron Islands. After Aegon's decimation of Harrenhal and the death of Harren the Black and his sons, the Iron Islands were left in chaos with no king. Aegon freeing the River Lords from the Iron Islands' grasp also resulted in the death of many lords and famous warriors of the Iron Islands. And after Aegon I defeated Harren the Black, he really didn't pay much attention to the Iron Islands because he was so focused on the rest of Westeros, which left the Ironborn to start fighting amongst themselves for who would be king next. Qhorin Volmark, a minor lord of Harlaw, first claimed kingship with the claim that his grandmother was the younger sister of Harwin Hardhand, who was Harwin the Black's Ironborn grandsire who had taken the trident. A little bit later, on Old Wyck, 40 priests came together beneath the bones of Naga and placed a driftwood crown on the barefoot holy man called Lodos, a man that claimed he was the living son of the drowned god. But also on Great Wyck, Pike, and Arkmount, other people claimed their right to the Iron Islands. For a whole year, men fought each other by land and sea, fighting for whichever man they felt deserved to be the heir of the Black Line. In 2 AC, Aegon finally decided enough was enough, and he rode on Balerion the Black Dread, followed by a war fleet, to Great Wyck. The Iron Men did just as well as the rest of Westeros against Aegon, and they were quickly defeated. Aegon himself killed Qhorin Volmark with his sword Blackfire. Next, Aegon turned to Old Wyck, where things took kind of a weird twist. The priest king Lodos called on the Krakens to destroy Aegon's ships. When no Krakens appeared, Lodos filled his robes with stones and walked into the ocean with thousands of his followers to talk with his father and seek counsel. And it worked as well as you think it would. Their bloated, rotting corpses washed up on the shores of the Iron Islands for years. But interestingly, the priest's body was never found. Great Wyck and Pike, having much more sense, surrendered to Aegon and bent the knee. Aegon's next problem was who would rule the Iron Islands. The people of the conquered Westeros had their own ideas of what to do with the Ironborn. Some wanted the islands to belong to Casterly Rock, while others claimed Lord Tully should make the Ironborn his vassals, which would be nice payback for the Ironborn ruling the Riverlands for so long. Some even wanted Aegon to cleanse the islands of the Ironborn and be done with them for good. Instead, Aegon gathered the remaining lords of the Iron Islands and allowed them to pick their own Lord Paramount. They chose Vicon Greyjoy, a man with a long and distinguished lineage who was known as Lord Reaper of Pike, a famous captain descended from the Grey King. And if you don't know, the Grey King is said to be the Ironborn man that ruled the Iron Islands during the Age of Heroes. And the Ironborn easily accepted Lord Greyjoy, as years of war and the death of Harren the Black had exhausted and impoverished them. Lord Greyjoy would rule from the Seastone Chair and Pike and proved to be a cautious and stern ruler. Lord Greyjoy commanded reaving should be done far away from the shores of Westeros so as to not upset Aegon, and Lord Greyjoy also allowed septons back on the islands, since Aegon had accepted the Seven as his gods. When the Ironborn became upset by this, Lord Greyjoy reminded his son, "Words are wind." He is now Aegon's man, and no one is fool enough to go against Aegon and his dragons. Lord Greyjoy's son would remember and honor these words when he came to rule the Iron Islands. So with the Iron Islands taken care of, Aegon eventually turned his eyes back to Dorne 2 years later in 4 AC. He first sent Rhaenys on her dragon Meraxus to burn Planky Town and then approached Sunspear. Next, Aegon and Lord Tyrell fought in the Prince's Pass against the Mountain Lords. Unfortunately, Lord Tyrell's men were not used to the climate of Dorne, and many of them died of extreme sun exposure and thirst while they were ambushed by the Dornish on their way to Hellholt. And the Dornish had a really good plan. They would attack with rocks or spears or arrows, and then they would quickly disappear as soon as Aegon threatened to get on his dragon and take flight to breathe fire on them. But regardless of that, when Lord Tyrell and what was left of his men reached Hellholt, they found the castle empty. Aegon had continued on from the Prince's Pass to Euronwood, and found that it was held by a small group of old men, boys, and women. He had a brief siege against Euronwood, and then ended up taking it. But after that, Aegon found little opposition when castle after castle he went to was found to be abandoned. Finally, at Ghost Hill, held by House Tulan, Aegon found the Tulan's ghost banner flying above the walls, and was told that Lord Tulan had sent out his champion to face Aegon. Aegon faced the champion and quickly killed the man, but then later learned that Tulan's champion was actually his mad fool, and Tulan had left the castle long ago. Later, the Tulans would put up a new banner, with a dragon biting its own tail, green on gold, in memory of their slain fool. And while all this was going on with Rhaenys and Aegon and Lord Tyrell, Orys Baratheon also led his own assault on the Boneway, which did not go well at all. The Dornish men pelted Orys Baratheon's men with rocks, arrows, and spears from up high, murdered Orys Baratheon's men at night, and blocked both entrances to the Boneway. Shortly after being blocked inside the Boneway, Orys Baratheon and many of his men were captured, and held captive until 7 AC, so for 3 years they were held captive, until they were finally ransomed for their weight in gold. When Orys Baratheon and his men returned to Aegon in 7 AC, following the paid ransom, each and every one of them was missing their sword hand, so that they might never take up arms against Dorne again. But aside from Orys Baratheon's ordeal, many of the Dornish gave up their seats without a fight, refused to defend their castles, and refused to bend a knee. Dorne was very smart. They knew what happened when people waited in their castles for Aegon and his dragons. When Aegon and Rhaenys finally came to Sunspear, even Princess Maria Martell was gone. Aegon and Rhaenys declared this a victory, and that Dorne was now under the rule of the Iron Throne. Aegon and Rhaenys returned to King's Landing and put Lord Rosby in charge of Sunspear and Lord Tyrell in charge of men to put down any revolts that occur. Almost the very moment Aegon and Rhaenys returned to King's Landing, the Dornish chose that moment to rebel. The Dornish lords had Aegon's men and knights put to the sword or tortured, some even making a game out of how long a knight would live while having pieces of him removed. However, Lord Rosby was said to get a kinder ending than Aegon's knights. The Princess of Dorne herself dragged him, bound hand and foot, to the top of the Spear Tower, where she threw him out a window. Hearing of the rebellion happening in Sunspear, Lord Harlan Tyrell quickly set out from Hellholt to stop the rebellion and retake Sunspear, but Lord Tyrell and his entire army soon vanished into the sands, and they were never heard from again. Some travelers report that there are areas where the wind shifts the sands to reveal bones and pieces of armor, but the Dornish men claim that they aren't Lord Tyrell's men, and that those sands are burial grounds for thousands of years of battles, and the bones could belong to any time and any battle. So by 7 AC, when Orys Baratheon and the other lords are released, missing one hand, Aegon is furious, and he is dead set on revenge against Dorne. Aegon and his sisters mount their dragons, and they burn Dornish castles over and over. Dorne responds to this by sending a force to Cape Wrath in 8 AC, sacking 6 towns and villages and burning half the Rainwood. Aegon counters to this by the next year in 9 AC by burning more Dornish castles. And Dorne counters this by sending Lord Fowler and his men to seize and burn the Great Marcher Castle of Nightsong, taking lords and defenders hostages, while Dorne also sends Sir Joffrey Dane to march to Oldtown, razing the fields and villages outside of it. But of course that is not the end of it, because Aegon and his sisters counter that in 10 AC by unleashing more fire on Starfall, Skyreach, and Hellholt. But this actually turns out to be a big loss for the Targaryens. At Hellholt, Rhaenys' dragon Meraxus takes a bolt from a scorpion in its eye, and the dragon with Rhaenys on its back falls onto the castle, destroying the highest tower and part of its walls in the process. There's debate on how exactly Rhaenys died. Some claim she lost her seat and fell to her death, some claim she was crushed beneath her dragon in the castle yard, and others say Rhaenys survived her fall only to be slowly tortured until her death. Regardless of how she died, her body was never returned to King's Landing or Aegon. And Aegon did not take the death of his favorite sister wife well. The following 2 years were called the Dragon's Wrath, as Visenya and Aegon, both grief-stricken over the loss of their sister, set every keep, castle, and holdfast, except for Sunspear and the Shadow City, on fire at least once. Why Aegon and Visenya avoided Sunspear is up to debate. Was it because they feared the Princess of Dorne and that she had acquired some means to kill dragons, or was Aegon trying to turn the rest of the Dorne against the Martells, who were being spared? Proof for the latter is all the letters sent to the Dornish houses asking them to surrender and claiming the Martells betrayed them by buying their own safety from the Targaryens, and at the expense of the rest of Dorne. But Aegon was not done. Next, Aegon put prices on the heads of Dornish lords, leading to 6 or more Dornish lords being killed by assassins, even if only 2 of those assassins ever lived to collect their reward from Aegon. And Dorne again responded, using the same methods, paying for the death of Iron Throne serving lords. In King's Landing, Lord Fell died in a brothel, and Aegon was attacked 3 different times. Visenya was also attacked. Her guards were killed, but she survived when she cut down her last attacker with her sword Dark Sister. But despite everything and Dorne being a burning ruin, the Dornish still refused to surrender, fighting from the shadows. Finally, the Princess of Dorne passed away in 13 AC, and her aged son, Prince Naemor, wanted an end to this war. He decided enough was enough. He sent a delegation led by his daughter, Prince Daria, to King's Landing. Prince Daria and her escort arrived at King's Landing, bringing the skull of Meraxus as a gift for the king. Lord Oakhart was disgusted and demanded the princess be sent to the worst brothel to serve any man that would take her. And Visenya and Orys Baratheon also did not like the Dornish gift at all. But Aegon allowed the princess to talk, and she declared that Dorne wanted peace, but peace of two kingdoms no longer at war, not peace between a vassal and a lord. Men in Aegon Fort began to say, "No peace without submission," claiming Aegon would look weak if he agreed to those terms, and the lords of the Reach and Stormlands would be furious after all they suffered at the hands of the Dornish. Aegon was about to refuse the offer for peace when the Princess of Dorne placed a private letter from her father in Aegon's hands. Aegon read the letter on his iron throne, clenching it so hard his hand bled. He rose, burned the letter, and departed on his dragon's back for Dragonstone. The next morning he returned to Aegon Fort, agreed to peace, and signed the treaty. People still speculate what the letter from the Prince of Dorne contained. Did he threaten to hire faceless men to kill Aegon's young son and heir, Rhaenys, the only child he had by Rhaenys? Or did the prince reveal they still had Rhaenys, alive but mutilated, claiming her more harm if he didn't agree to peace, but the promise to end her suffering if Aegon ended the war? Whatever the letter contained, Dorne and the Iron Throne found peace for a time. That is, before other Targaryen kings would attempt their own conquests of Dorne after Aegon I. Make sure you join us next Sunday when we talk about the actual ruling of Aegon I and his time as king, as well as the help his sister wives provided, or come back this Wednesday when we talk about Blackfyre.